Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and from the furthest reaches of the galaxy I've heard the question, who is stronger, Wolf or William? Or at the very least I saw one person ask it on Twitter. But hey, I like these topics, so why not make a video on it? So here it is, Wolf versus William, Sekiro versus Nioh. We'll break it down into story and gameplay, as there's often a disconnect between the two, for obvious reasons. But for the most part we're going to focus more on the story aspect. Incidentally, that's what we're going to start with. Perhaps the best question to ask first would be, what are their most impressive feats? What is the most powerful entity these two have defeated? In Wolf's case, he defeated Sword Saint Ishin, the Divine Dragon, and the Guardian Ape. I would generally think of these as the strongest entities we encounter in Shadows Die Twice. Ishin is the strongest human we encounter, right? Especially when he is outfitted with the second Mortal Blade. Whereas the Divine Dragon is presumably the strongest fantastical creature we encounter, and the Guardian Ape is the strongest beast. You could also swap out the Divine Dragon with Demon of Hatred, the failed Shura. But would you say these are reasonably Wolf's greatest victories? Not to say that Ao, Genichiro and so on are pushovers. Nobody wanted to mess with Ishin though. The Interior Ministry invading Ashina when he is on his deathbed seems like no coincidence to me. Ishin also states that he killed Shura, or something much like it, long ago, which is probably in reference to the Blacksmith or the Demon of Hatred, which Wolf also manages to defeat. I get the impression anything Wolf was able to beat, Ishin could beat too. So how about the Divine Dragon? At the risk of people making the false assumption that it is the god, and thus omnipotent, as happened with Bloodborne a lot, on a slight tangent, people assume that because the Great Ones in Bloodborne are like entities from Lovecraft, that they are literally entities from Lovecraft, which is a false assumption. Bloodborne is not part of the Lovecraft mythos, the universe. It is similar to it. In the same way that Dark Souls is not part of the Dungeons & Dragons universe, even though it has some of the same elements and monsters from it. You will never find anything within Bloodborne detailing the immense combatability and power of the Great Ones, because it doesn't exist. They are not strong fighters that conquer. There is a reason the majority of them are hidden from sight. To contrast with Sekiro and Dark Souls, both games of which literally do start with a cinematic showing you how incredibly powerful or skilled the final bosses are. And understand that isn't a knock on Bloodborne. I love Bloodborne, I think it's a great game, but a lot of people go, Cthulhu can do this, so the hunter being able to beat the Great Ones means the hunter is able to wipe out everything in Lovecraft as well, killing literal gods, which isn't very impressive in that context. In Bloodborne you are just an insane person who butchers everything in their path. Of course the hunter is a powerful character, a skilled character, but you can't take things out of context and say they're killing Cthulhus when you're not. But anyway, back to the Divine Dragon. From what I've been reading, the divine in its name is like to throw a lot of people off. People read divine and they think, oh, that means it is God, it is omnipotent. The original name of the dragon is Sakura Dragon, but it was changed in localization, no doubt because Cherry Blossom Dragon doesn't sound very intimidating or all that good in English, so they changed it to Divine Dragon, which sounds fine, I suppose. Again, I'm not saying that means the dragon is weak or anything, just don't take divine to mean that it is some omnipotent god. It should go without saying, but a lot of people do seem to mix these things up for some reason. Because I suppose when some people hear gods or divine, divinity, sometimes they jump straight to God from the Bible, the omnipotent, all-powerful Abrahamic God, which is not always the case. A lot of this could well stem from, well, translation issues. You have the word, kami in Japanese, which is often translated as, like, a god, but it isn't quite the same thing. But going back to Ishin, if he is the strongest character in Shadows Die Twice, himself claiming that the nearest he ever came to death was during his fight with Tomoe, this does form a vaguely useful connection with Nioh, albeit a very, very loose one, I'll admit. Tomoe came from the Sacred Realm, the Fountainhead Palace, meaning it's possible she is a descendant or member of the Minamoto clan. Maybe, maybe not though. Nioh 2 looks like it might be heading back to that same period as well, incidentally. As I'm sure you noticed that the Fountainhead Palace is quite distinct from the other areas of the game because it is from an older period of history, maybe, I don't know, a few hundred years before. As it happens, Sekiro and Nioh 2 take place around the same time, that is to say, late 1500s or the late Sengoku era, meaning that the Interior Ministry is likely to be that of Nobunaga Oda or Hideyoshi Toyotomi. But of course, this in Shadows Die Twice is the alternate fantasy Japan, which goes out of its way to avoid strong connections to real history. We don't even know the exact time that the game takes place in, just late 1500s. It seems more likely that the Interior Ministry would be that of Nobunaga's, if you ask me. He died in, 1582 or something, and was far more willing and open to trade with foreigners. The Fulminated Mercury remarks that it was created in secret by the Interior Ministry using knowledge from across southern seas. Obviously, even though Hideyoshi and Ieyasu closed Japan considerably in comparison, and they, didn't really let in foreigners and all that, it doesn't mean they couldn't have used the knowledge that came during Nobunaga's more open borders, open trade sort of period. Either way, the ruthlessness of the attack on Ashina could well suit any of the three unifiers, honestly. William from Nioh, meanwhile, arrives in Japan in the year 1600. Nobunaga and Hideyoshi are dead, and Ieyasu is about to claim the land for himself. And what are William's greatest feats? Well, for starters, he defeats both Muneshige Tachibana and Tadakatsu Honda, considered some of the most skilled warriors of their time. I think it's only fair we consider all side content as canon in both games, including all possibilities. Now you might be thinking, well that obviously favours William, because there's a lot more side content in Nioh, whereas in Sekiro, there's a few optional bosses. For example, Wolf beat both Guardian Apes at the same time. He beat the Demon of Hatred, which is an optional boss. But then the side content in Nioh is generally the hardest content, such as William defeating both Tadakatsu and Muneshige at the same time, compared to Sekiro, where it's just like, I don't know, there's also a charmless bell run, you could say that's canon, but I do think it's fair to consider all of it as being part of their achievements. Specifically in Nioh, these things are duels. You're fighting Tadakatsu and Muneshige at the same time, but you're not killing them. There's no obvious answer as to who is the strongest human that William defeats, whereas for Wolf it is quite clearly Isshin. Within the context of the game, though, it would probably be Yukimura Sanada, another extremely famous warrior of the time. As for his strongest yokai or monster kill, it would probably be the Yamata no Orochi, the 8-headed serpent, or maybe the 9-tailed fox, Tamamo no Mai. As for Orochi, Edward Kelly used vast amounts of Amrita to resurrect it, fusing it with his own guardian spirit, the Ouroboros, if you can even call that his guardian spirit. But you might say this isn't the true Orochi, but that's up for debate. On the one hand, maybe it was just a poor imitation, but on the other hand, he does say that he's going to resurrect it, not just recreate a version of it. Consider with Nobunaga, he needed to use the actual body to bring him back. So where did Kelly get the body for Orochi? Or was it different because it was a yokai, not a human? Or was his own guardian spirit somehow connected to that? Either way, William also defeated one of the three strongest Oni, the 9-tailed fox. Incidentally, the other two were defeated by Hide in Nioh 2. Although he did have Yukimura helping him when he defeated the 9-tailed fox, but he defeated Orochi all by himself. So whilst it looks like William has the greater feats, such as defeating not only Orochi and the 9-tailed fox, but also a bevy of the strongest generals and warriors of the period, his are also at times a little harder to attribute, whereas all of Wolf's victories are solely his. He never relied on the help of anyone else. Unless you count Kuro's divine blood, making him super duper immortal. Then you have a few other pertinent questions to ask, the main two being, can Wolf see guardian spirits, and does the Fushigiri, the mortal blade, work on William? Both characters have a form of functional immortality, in that Wolf has the Divine Heir's blood, which enables him to revive, with certain limitations. Whereas William's guardian spirit, Saoirse, grants him the ability to return from death so long as he believes in her. Being a guardian spirit, most humans cannot see Saoirse, and we have little way of knowing whether or not Wolf would be able to, but let's assume he can, perhaps. Second of all, what would the Mortal Blade do if used on William? See, the Mortal Blades in Sekiro are quite vague in their operation. The Red Blade, Gracious Gift of Tears, is an Odachi capable of slaying the undying, whereas the Black Blade, Open Gate, appears to have the power to open the gates to the afterlife. So in a way, the two of them together control the passage of life and death. I think it is fair to assume that the Red Blade can kill most undying characters, such as the Chosen Undead from Dark Souls, William from Nioh, Hide from Nioh 2, despite all three of them having very different forms of immortality from each other, and indeed the immortality present in Sekiro, which stems largely from the Divine Dragon. I think that makes sense, right? A rival with that stems largely from the existence of the Black Blade, I must admit. Without that existing, and I'll point out, it was sort of cheap how it just popped up in the story without any real foreshadowing for the most part, then it would be a lot easier to argue that the Red Blade can just specifically kill things connected to the dragon. But with the Black Blade able to have some vague sort of reincarnation related abilities, it would only seem logical that the Red Blade is a more generic immortality killer than being specifically used against subjects of the dragon, which would ultimately mean it's very possible Wolf could kill William, as the Red Mortal Blade would presumably sever his connection to Saoirse. Only question then is, would he again be revived until Saoirse herself is killed? It's rather nebulous because William's immortality comes from Saoirse, but even throughout the course of Nioh, when he is cut off from her, he is still able to bring himself back to life because she does exist, even if she is not joined with him during that. So they don't really have to be connected in that sense, because Kelly stole her and locked her away. William had no access to her, unless her one feather that he did have is what allowed him to revive. William's immortality comes from Saoirse, who will exist as long as William believes in her, compared to, say, Hide from Nioh 2. Hide's immortality stems from the Sohayamaru blade. Still, does William have a way to kill Wolf? The prospect of immortal enemies never arises in Nioh from what I can recall, only in Nioh 2. However, William seems to have the innate ability to deal with such things, perhaps because of his affinity with spirits. The only specifically immortal things in Nioh, after all, are William himself, and then Hide and Otakimaru in Nioh 2. Whether or not William would be able to sever Wolf's immortality is up for debate. He has no specific weapon that does that, but then we have another similar issue. William defeated stronger opponents, but in a more questionable manner when you have the Nine-Tailed Fox being thrown in with Yukimura's assistance. Whereas Wolf has a specific method that would likely sever William's immortality, but his own immortality has far more caveats. If we are talking tiers of immortality, you would probably have to rank Wolf's as very low compared to William, for example. There are essentially no drawbacks to William's deaths, no hollowing, no dragon rot, nothing like that. He just comes back retaining all of the knowledge and the skill he had prior to his death, whereas with Wolf, every time he dies, it spreads the dragon rot, and it seems to have other effects too, and potentially not being unlimited. They seem to imply that eventually this sort of power would expire. All in all, they are a very good matchup, I would say. Your classic pirate versus ninja. Only one is an immortal ninja and the other's an immortal pirate samurai. William is able to masterfully use katanas, spears, kusarigama, tonfa, odachi, axes, onmyo magic, and ninjutsu. Whereas Wolf's expertise appears limited to ninjutsu, katanas, and odachi. We can reasonably infer that Wolf would master other weapons, however, given how quickly he adapts to the tools at his disposal during the game, such as the prosthetic arm and all the tools that get connected to it. whereas William's mastery is briefly mentioned in that he seems to have the uncanny ability to almost absorb knowledge, such as by reading texts on combat. He can master them purely from that. At the very start of Nioh, after all, he starts off just sort of bashing people with his sword, then on the voyage to Japan he reads books about it and then basically becomes a master purely from that. So I think I have to give William the edge on that count, because he has the very video game style power of instantly learning to do things just from being exposed to it, which is very possibly tied to his affinity with the spirit realm. How about canon losses though? Well, Wolf gets creamed by Genichiro in their first encounter, either through a distraction caused by another enemy if you win the fight, or simply because Genichiro was too much for him if you lose the fight. That's about it though, unless you count him suiciding when he grabs the mortal blade, which I don't think you can, or the time someone, most likely Ao, shanked him from behind and basically killed him until Kuro gave him his blood. William, on the other hand, is overpowered by Nobunaga during their fight, although I do wonder at times if William was serious in that fight. Because on the one hand, Nobunaga exhibits no killing intent, he was only messing around. On the other hand, William doesn't look like he's just playing around. He doesn't look relaxed when Nobunaga raises his blade. He flinches like he's afraid he's about to be smacked on the head with a sword. So I don't think he was going easy, so to speak. Either way, both have one canon loss. Wolf goes on to beat Genichiro twice, whereas William beats Nobunaga in a side quest, fighting him and Lady No at the same time. Not specifically part of the story, however, because in the story, Nobunaga comes back, he fights William, and then he, vanishes back to the spirit realm because he's like, why have you brought me back to life, this is silly. William and Wolf are very close, however, both having defeated skilled opponents and various monsters, though William definitely fought more monsters and has a larger repertoire of powers. By the end of Nioh, he has the ability to transform his appearance from Kelly's snake, for example, and he's absorbed quite a lot of guardian spirits over the course of the game. So, who wins? I honestly think it's so close that you can't really call it. Both have relatively equal levels of determination too. For the most part, I think William has the slight edge, but then that would be evened out by Wolf having the Mortal Blade, which seems like quite a good counter against William, probably. But would it be enough to just use it on William? Would you have to use it on Saoirse? Would it even work on Saoirse? Because we don't know she is technically immortal, she's just a guardian spirit, and those things seem to exist in a cycle of dying and being reborn anyway, so it's all so spiritual that it's very hard to say if the Mortal Blade would work or not, but probably would. It is a lot easier to call a winner on a gameplay level though. William has full invincibility, a bunch of parries, as well as bows, rifles and cannons, along with much more speed at his disposal, along with the whole catch your sword with my bare hands and stab you with it stuff. Living weapon powering you up and making you invincible is just hard to get around, frankly. Having full invincibility is quite an advantage. Wolf suffers on the gameplay perspective because Sekiro is a very focused game, and you don't have that many tools at your disposal. It's not like a Dark Souls where you have different builds and magic and stuff. You are specifically like a shinobi. You can't be as absurdly broken as you can be in Nioh, wherein weapons like the dual swords and Kusarigama can be combined with various magics and status effects to reach levels of power that Wolf can't really compete with. The nearest thing to being overpowered you get in Shadows Die Twice would be, I don't know, using the Mortal Draw technique on some bosses. And Wolf can't compete with that level of customizability. Customizability? I don't know if that's even a word. He can't really compete even with Dark Souls or Bloodborne characters from a gameplay perspective for the most part. That's just because Nioh is a lot closer to an action game, whilst retaining some of the broken stat aspects of an RPG. One advantage Wolf has though, over William, Chosen Undead, Bearer of the Curse, Ashen One, whoever, Hunter, he has no stamina. He has infinite stamina. William has a stamina bar in the form of his ki, and even with ki pulses and the like, which put him at a huge advantage over Souls characters, he still does have that limitation. Wolf, though, he has a posture gauge, which works in some ways like a stamina bar, but he's able to sprint and attack indefinitely. I don't know if that would really grant him a win, though, to be honest. Not against William. It would sure help against the Souls characters. From a gameplay perspective, William creams Souls or Bloodborne characters, any of them, currently. To be honest, I think he could probably fight a few of them at the same time, because you can become so busted and so broken in Nioh. You would need to go into action game territory like Devil May Cry and whatnot to beat him. But then, when you go into Devil May Cry, kind of no one can really beat Dante because of Royal Guard, and a properly played Royal Guard is effectively unbeatable because it's perfect offense and perfect defense at the same time. Or well, perfect defense and extremely powerful offense. Perfect offense would be if you one-shot everything, which he doesn't quite do. Almost though. So gameplay-wise, William wins. Story-wise, I think it's very hard to call it. William, I think, has more achievements and feats under his belt, whereas Wolf has the Mortal Blade. But then again, I suppose William could catch the Mortal Blade with his bare hands and then stab Wolf with it. Wolf sometimes seems to exhibit more skill in wielding his weapon throughout the story of Sekiro. William's skill is mostly in gameplay. You don't really see him doing very many skillful things in cutscenes. But yes, he faces stronger opponents, and he has a better form of immortality. At the end of the day though, both games are good. They're both great games. And I know what you're thinking though. Well, who is stronger, William or Hide? Hide defeated 2 of the big 3 Oni in Shutendoji and Otakimaru, whereas William only beat the Nine-Tailed Fox, with help. That is very true, but then, and spoilers for Nioh 2 if you haven't beaten it, William does kind of overpower Hide in the cutscene, and even with the excuse of Hide just woke up and all that, I still feel like William is stronger. But I would admit, on that front, I'm a little biased, because I like William more than Hide. Hide just fell flat for me as a character, quite frankly. But hey, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys next time for, I don't know, Tom Nook versus Ganondorf or something like that. Until then, goodbye.